it's always hard to know. Good afternoon, thank you for that introduction. My name is Gerard Clover. I do indeed work for Forest Research, but I'm talking today about work that I've done for the John Innes Centre as the Impact and Engagement Manager for the BRIGIT project. I'm talking about our experience engaging with stakeholders in government, in industry, and also with the public as well. Okay, why has that disappeared? Can you still see my screen? Because it seems to have suddenly minimized.
I think you're on the end of your show.
I am. This is very strange.
You need to go in the beginning of your slideshow, not the end.
Okay, you get a preview of all my slides.
Yeah.
So, sorry about that. BRIGIT is a large project. I'm sure you'll be familiar with it. It involves something like 80 scientists in 12 organisations across the UK. Project's being funded by UKRI, DEFRA and the Scottish Government, really to develop the evidence that's needed to reduce the risk of Xylella being introduced, to respond to interceptions and outbreaks, and should the disease actually become established, to mitigate its impact. And my role has been to engage with stakeholders, in particular the operation and policy making parts of government, but also with industry and the public. And I see my role really as developing conversations in which stakeholders can articulate their needs and their priorities to ensure these needs are then incorporated wherever possible into the BRIGIT project and modify the research that's being done. And then in particular to ensure that the research outputs are communicated to stakeholders in a way that they can be used. And obviously ensuring that the needs of stakeholders are met is key to the success of BRIGIT. So, I'm going the wrong way. As a tool for engagement, we've developed websites describing the project on the John Innes website, and then created 2 additional sites which focus on the potential hosts and the disease symptoms and on the insect vectors, and they're hosted by the RHS and the University of Sussex. And as the research has progressed, these websites have provided us with the means to disseminate the outputs of the project, for example, information on the genetics of the insect populations and practical information on how to identify the disease. Moving more specifically on to government engagement, okay. We've been very fortunate to have a designated contact point in DEFRA who's represented both DEFRA but also the devolved administrations. Mike Sutton-Croft has taken that role and he's been invaluable, and he and others in DEFRA and also the Scottish Government were involved in the development of the project from the outset. And having that understanding from DEFRA and the DAs about the research process, not only the potential for research, but also some of the uncertainties and the constraints of the research process has been really very important. Oh, sorry, I am really doing very well today. Early in the project, we organised a policy workshop with representatives from DEFRA and the devolved administrations and UKRI to discuss what the policy evidence needs were and how these were and could be met by the BRIGIT project. And following that meeting, we developed a roadmap detailing the outputs from BRIGIT and when stakeholders could actually anticipate the delivery of those outputs. And this has subsequently been updated and presented at the Xylella Preparedness Board, which is a government group which meets every month. And participation in this meeting for me has enabled me to provide the opportunity to discuss how risks arising from the research can be managed. For example, the potential to detect Xylella inadvertently while sequencing insects. And it's also provided a forum to discuss and fine-tune both some of the research and operational needs. For example, the need to upskill some of the newly recruited inspectors that have been brought on following Brexit, and how we can provide them with skills on identification of both the ornamental hosts and also vector surveillance, and how we can actually meet these during the BRIGIT project. And so through our linkages with DEFRA, we've also had the opportunity to present the project to the UK Plant Health Services and PHSI conferences, and with DEFRA's Chief Scientific Advisor as well, which has provided that discussion at a variety of different levels, both high-level policy, but also operational. Picking up on that last slide, in response to train inspectors, BRIGIT's provided face-to-face and obviously more recently online workshops on the hosts and on vector and disease identification. And the project's had been designed to provide that training to volunteers, but very soon we realized there was a need to extend it to include government and industry as well. And we've been very lucky to work with the Horticultural Trades Association to enable that. And to support the training, we developed a video tutorial explaining how to survey, identify, and to report spittlebug nymphs. And this year, again, we'll focus on that type of output, and we'll work with APHA to develop a training video to provide guidance on surveying for adult spittlebugs. Recognizing the increased awareness of Xylella that we're generating, we've also worked with government agencies to agree a triage system to deal with suspect reports, so that the system isn't overwhelmed with poor quality reports of potential disease. And we've also worked with DEFRA on a number of practical applications, for example, drafting a planting list of non-Xylella hosts that could be used in the event of a response in the UK. Moving on to industry engagement, we planned and delivered a program of events focusing on trade and more public events, including ornamental, fruit and forestry sectors, which we were able to deliver obviously face-to-face in 2019. And wherever possible, we've worked with other organisations such as APHA, Forest Research and East Malling, thinking about the legacy of the project to ensure we provide consistent messages to minimise stakeholder fatigue, but also ensure some longevity of the project. And obviously that programme came to a juddering halt in March last year, but moving to online events has allowed us to increase our reach and engage with a wider range of people and different audiences as well. We've also written a series of press releases which are being picked up by national media, as well as articles for trade magazines, including the Journal of Forestry, Vineyard Magazine, Landscaper Magazine, and publications for AHDB and the HTA. Finally, thinking about the way we've been able to communicate with the public, I'll give just two examples. Firstly, the Spittlebug survey, which we initiated in 2019. The overt purpose of that work was really to motivate people to send us records of spittle so that we could understand the distribution of potential vectors. And in that, it was very successful. We received something like 19,000 records in 2019 and another 6,000 records last year, despite us deliberately not publicising it further because of the COVID outbreak. However, the survey was also intended to raise awareness of the issue of Xylella amongst the public and stakeholders. And we generated more than 70 press articles and coverage on BBC radio and television. And the article on the BBC website alone was read by more than 1.25 million people within 3 days. We also managed to persuade Helen Miller to voice an animated cartoon explaining what Xylella is, its potential impact, and more importantly, what people can do to lessen the threat. And we also deliberately linked in with government initiatives, for example, around dissuading private importations. And that video was launched last year to mark the beginning of the International Year of Plant Health. And to date has had something like 10,000 views on YouTube. Obviously, coronavirus has had a huge impact on the engagement activities we had planned over the last year, a year which ironically was meant to mark the importance of plant health. And whereas some events have been able to be completed, such as having an interview with Pippa on Gardener's Question Time to discuss the threat posed by Xylella and how it's being addressed in BRIGIT, we've had to postpone or cancel many events. For example, we had a major event, or a major garden that we planned to exhibit at the Chelsea Flower Show, and that of course was no longer going to happen. However, I would say the situation has enabled us to work in different ways and challenged us to be adaptable. So for example, we've created videos about Xylella and the BRIGIT project for social media. And these have had to be created because of lockdown using existing footage, but both APHA and DEFRA have complemented that work and are using those videos for their own internal training. It's also provided us opportunities to reach new audiences by moving to digital platforms. For example, we've developed scientific workshops on diagnostics and on modelling to present the research outputs from the BRIGIT work, and those have been presented in context with research from overseas. And most recently, we presented a Xylella Awareness Week in which we delivered workshops for public gardens and for environmental groups, for industry in association again with the HTA, and for more than 200 plant health inspectors across the UK, including obviously the new inspectors have been brought on very recently. And on that, noting the time, I think I will stop there. So I'll